I have reviewed the many comments and suggestions provided by the public that were submitted to the Commission since this rule was initially proposed. I read with interest several of the public comments which chastised this rule because it does not prohibit operators from shutting down production prior to a weather event. And indeed, as I stated in my comments when this Commission passed 365 last November, this is my quote, "The Railroad Commission has no authority to require operators to produce gas at a specific time, or for that matter at all. The oil and gas industry is no different than any other business in this regard. So it is important to remember what the purpose behind this weatherization rule is and what it isn't. The oil and gas industry is not homogeneous. It is comprised of many unique and individual parts that, working in concert, provide us with the many creature comforts we enjoy in our daily lives. That includes upstream, which is comprised of oil wells, gas wells, gathering pipelines, and it includes midstream, which are processing plants, compressor stations, transmission pipelines, and saltwater disposal facilities. These are all unique. They all have their individual functions, needs, challenges, and vulnerabilities as it concerns their operations. It is impossible to write rules or legislation to remove all risk or mandate normal operations. To envision every conceivable weather event and how it might impact the various parts of our system is not feasible. But what we can do is ask those entities to look at their operations, identify potential vulnerabilities, and have plans and procedures to fortify their operations to avoid or minimize disruptions. This rule is about preparation. It's about planning for the unknown. It's about communicating. It's about ensuring that those identified as a critical piece of our natural gas supply system can continue to do so when they are most needed. I've read some comments who express concerns that some may just want to pay the fine to avoid weatherizing at all. I don't believe that would occur for the simple fact that the classification schedule places serious emphasis on operator conduct, repeat violations, and efforts taken by operators to remedy violations. Repeat and deliberate attempts to avoid compliance with 3.66 will not be taken lightly by the Commission, and it will result in referral to the Attorney General. I've also read some recent media stories that have stated our proposed rule opens the door to market manipulation. I feel such arguments exemplify a total lack of understanding regarding the oil and natural gas supply chain and a fundamental misrepresentation of how these commodities are retrieved from a mile or more under the ground and are ultimately delivered to the end user. Let me give you a brief explanation of why this is unlikely the case. If you operate an oil well, that is a well that produces primarily oil along with a modest amount of gas referred to as casing head gas, you profit primarily from selling oil. The gas is not the primary source of your expected revenue. Then there is also purely gas wells. Combined, these sectors are collectively known as upstream. So you have a well producing primary oil along with some natural gas. Now you have to do something with that natural gas, and ideally you don't just waste that resource. I, like many in this room and in this state, am not a fan of wasting our precious natural resources. Because you are a responsible operator, you want to minimize flaring and ideally would like to make some money from the gas you produce from your oil well. So instead you connect to a pipeline who agrees to take that gas off your hands. The pipeline purchases your gas at the point of connection to their system. The pipeline company is what we refer to as midstream. As a producer of this gas, remember, you own an oil well and such are primarily concerned with liquids. You agree to sell your gas to the pipeline or midstream at a predetermined price, which is usually negotiated at the beginning of the month. So there is zero incentive for you to shut in a well for purposes of raising prices in times of inclement weather. I agree with the inherent objective of SB3 as it relates to securing our natural gas supply chain, and know my fellow commissioners in the industry does as well. I have heard the stories of struggles that many in our state faced without power over the course of Winter Storm Uri, and I myself was not exempt from those hardships. Like everyone else, I don't want to experience that again. However, the legislature legislative approach used by SB3 as it relates to matters under the Commission's jurisdiction was, at least in my opinion, like using a shotgun when a .22 would have sufficed. Because the reality is, the further down the supply chain you go, the more variables exist, and more variables equal more uncertainty. At the end of the day, the best way to ensure greater reliability is to reduce the number of things that can go wrong, and that means reducing the number of variables that you must contend with. There seems to be an obsession, or at the very least, an overemphasis on production from the wellhead. While it is certainly an important component in the overall system, our electrical grid shouldn't be overly reliant on just daily production to keep the power on. That isn't the case for many states or countries who are not blessed with the same significant natural resources as Texas. I'll close this by saying we should be focused on preparation. The best way Texas can prepare for the unexpected is to plan in advance. That means incentivizing and increasing the amount of availability of processed dry natural gas in our storage reserves. Texas has approximately 550 BCF of total gas storage capacity and is currently utilizing around 60% of that capacity space. As summer demand recedes and Texas begins preparing for the winter season, critical infrastructure facilities such as electrical power generators should take full advantage of the state's available underground gas storage capacity to plan and prepare for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, you have anything?
No, I appreciate his remarks and appreciate the good work our staff has done.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley, again, you and Natalie, and I appreciate the 139 comments. I probably wasn't as much in the weeds, but I read them all, and I appreciate the feedback we've got from people all over. I've got a couple of questions just to clarify maybe some of the changes that you looked at and some of the comments. Can you explain what the comments were and how you changed the attestation section? Is it similar kind of what we do to other rules? Would that be a fair assessment of it?
Yes, that's correct. We had a number of comments that said that it was a departure from commission practice, and so we tried to align it more with traditional commission forms. Most likely, or the closest one is the P5 organization report. That's where we borrowed the language from.
Okay, great. And can you talk about some of the statutory requirements, both penalties, enforcement, preparation, things like that were mandated by SB3, and confirm that this rule complies with that as well? Can you kind of go through a couple of the high points again, please?
Yes. Senate Bill 3 requires that operators that are subject to its requirements implement measures to prepare to operate during a weather emergency. So you'll see a lot of those terms in the rule language and then throughout the preamble, just to drive the point home that we borrowed those terms from SB3. As far as enforcement, the two statutes that authorize the commission to have enforcement authority over violations of this rule are different. So there's a statute for gas supply chain facilities, and there's one that relates to gas pipeline facilities. The commission will be handling both the enforcement and administration of violations for both types of facilities, so determining whether a violation occurs. But for gas supply chain facilities, the statute is different and it doesn't authorize the commission to assess the penalty. So for gas supply chain facilities, the commission will be referring those to the Attorney General, like you said, Commissioner Wright. But in both cases, the statutes authorize a penalty of $1 million for a violation.
Okay, and
Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, and we'll be doing inspections on all of this as well.
Correct. Those will begin December 1st.
Okay, and my last question, we had a lot of comments about the list that we had, all the requirements on weatherization, and I believe in our final draft, we've taken the list out and we hope to put some guidelines in. Is that correct? Can you explain that?
Yes, we had a lot of comments that recommended, instead of putting the weatherization practices in the rule, that we take them out of the rule and put them into a published document so that we can continue to engage with operators to determine what the different weatherization practices are, and then be able to update that more frequently than if we had them in the rule. So in the adopted version, we've removed that list from the rule, and we plan to publish guidance on our website about those weatherization practices.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for answering my
Thank you.
questions. I appreciate that. I appreciate all your work. We do have, I'm going to bring up the 3 people who've asked to make comments, and then we'll bring you back up. All right. Number 1 is Luke Warford, please. And everybody, I'm going to give you about like